My name is Serafina Morrow, 70 years old this spring, though most days I still feel the same woman who used to hem wedding gowns under the high windows of my old shop on Whitaker Street. People in Savannah say I'm quiet but sturdy, like the magnolia tree in my yard, roots deep, branches that don't break easily. I believed that about myself until that Sunday morning when one sentence cracked something I didn't know could break. The house smelled of cornbread and onions browning in the pan. Church bells floated in from the cathedral downtown, slow and steady as breath. I was stirring the pot of gumbo when I heard my daughter's voice from the living room. Petra had her mother-in-law on speakerphone again, that sharp woman, Drusilla Rodart, whose laugh always carried the sound of judgment. At first, I wasn't really listening. I'd learned to tune out their chatter about parties, neighbors, and whatever sale was happening on Broughton Street. But then Petra's tone shifted tight, impatient. "She's impossible. Mama. That old woman only gets in the way." The spoon slipped from my hand before I felt it go. It hit the tile with a sound that cut the room in half. I stood there, staring at the pot, at the swirl of steam rising like breath from a wound. For a long moment, all I heard was the hum of the ceiling fan and Drusilla's voice purring through the phone, agreeing. My own daughter, the child I raised through storms, night shifts, and years of being both mother and father, was talking about me like I was a chore that wouldn't go away. My knees felt weak, but I didn't move. I waited for her to correct herself, to say she didn't mean it. She didn't. She just laughed, low and weary, like someone describing a stain that never comes out. When their voices drifted to another topic, I bent down, picked up the spoon, rinsed it, and finished stirring. My hands trembled once, then steadied. "Lord," I whispered, barely breathing. "Show me how to keep my dignity." I turned off the stove, wiped the counter, and left the kitchen in silence. Upstairs, the cornbread cooled untouched, and in the still air of the hallway, something in me began to change. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, catching dust motes in the air like tiny ghosts. I'd been awake since 5, making coffee and folding the laundry Petra left in the machine overnight. Habit. I suppose years of being needed. Years of believing that love was proved through service. By 7, the kitchen was alive with footsteps and complaints. Petra brushed past me, talking on her phone. Her tone clipped. "I told you almond milk, not regular. You never listen." She poured herself a cup anyway and muttered, "It's always something." Colt sat at the table scrolling through his phone, earbuds in. He didn't greet me. He rarely did. His silence wasn't cruel, just the kind that erases you, piece by piece. Only lyric. My 12-year-old granddaughter seemed to see me. She patted in with her messy hair and sleep still on her face, hugging me around the waist. "Morning, Nana," she murmured. That single word, Nana, kept my heart steady. I served breakfast grits, eggs, a side of toast. Petra glanced at the plate and sighed. "We really need to cut back on carbs. Maybe next time. Just fruit." Her voice wasn't sharp, only tired, as if I were another small inconvenience on her to-do list. When the mail arrived, Petra flipped through it and slid an envelope toward me. "Your pension check came. I'll deposit it later. Groceries and gas have been crazy lately." I said nothing. She'd been managing my retirement money for over a year, calling it our family budget. I had wanted to believe that meant unity. Now it sounded like control, as the front door closed behind them. I sat at the empty table, tracing the grain of the wood with my fingertip. I'd worked 3 jobs in the 80s to buy this house sewing at dawn, cleaning offices at night, saving every coin in a coffee tin labeled home. Now, 40 years later, I felt like a guest in it. The clock ticked in the silence, marking every second of how far love had drifted from respect. By midweek, I found an excuse to leave the house. I told Petra I needed to pick up thread from the fabric store, though what I truly needed was air that didn't taste like resentment. Savannah mornings had that forgiving kind of light, the kind that makes even cracked sidewalks look gentle. I took the bus downtown and stopped at Cafe Azalea on Bull Street, a place that still brewed coffee strong enough to wake memory itself. Mireya Azul was already there, waving from her usual corner. She'd been my neighbor 30 years ago, back when our kids played jump rope in the street and we thought exhaustion was temporary. Now she was 72, retired from nursing but still sharp as vinegar and twice as healing. "You look thin," she said, squinting. "Don't tell me you're letting those grown children drain you dry again." Her words hit a tender spot, over steaming mugs. I told her everything the way Petra brushed past me, how she used my pension for family expenses, and the sentence that still echoed every time the house went quiet: "That old woman only gets in the way." Mireya listened without interrupting. She had a gift for silence that didn't feel empty. When I finally ran out of words, she leaned back and asked, "Serafina, the deed's still under your name?" "Right." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "The house. Whose name is on the papers mine," I said slowly. "Always has been." Her expression softened, but her voice was firm. "Then, darling, you're not trapped. You're the landlord." Something shifted inside me, like a window cracking open after years of dust. I hadn't thought about ownership in years, not just of property, but of myself. Mireya rummaged in her purse and slid a business card across the table. "Keegan Solorio, local attorney, good man. He helps seniors who've been taken for granted." The card trembled in my hand. I tucked it into my wallet as if it were something sacred, walking home beneath the Spanish moss. The air felt different, thicker, charged. I still didn't know what I would do, but for the first time in a long while, I felt the quiet hum of possibility beneath my ribs. Keegan Solorio's office sat above a florist shop on Whitaker Street. The scent of lilies drifted through the open window as I waited, twisting my wedding band that hadn't left my finger in 40 years. When he walked in, a man in his 40s with kind eyes and an unhurried way of speaking, I felt the stiffness in my shoulders begin to ease. He reviewed the folder I'd brought: the house deed, tax receipts, and the original purchase documents from 1983. His pen clicked twice before he looked up. "Mrs. Morrow, you're still the majority owner of the property. That means no one can force you out, not legally." The words sank in slowly, as if my ears didn't trust them. For months I'd lived like a guest in my own home, and now a stranger was telling me I was the landlord. Keegan leaned forward. "I know you don't want to fight, but protection isn't always about shouting. It's about record keeping. Start collecting small proofs. Receipts for what you buy, bills you pay, even photos of household items that belong to you. It all adds up if things ever turn ugly." I nodded, scribbling notes with trembling fingers. He smiled. "Paper shields," he said. "They don't make noise, but they hold." By the time I left, I had a list of steps: update the utilities, change my account passwords, and set phone alerts for every transaction. That night, after Petra and Colt went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone and a notebook, learning how to enable bank notifications. My hands shook at first, but the longer I worked, the steadier they became. When I finished, I slipped the new passwords into a sealed envelope labeled "For my eyes only." The phrase made me smile, small, secret, powerful, over the next few days. I cooked, cleaned, and smiled as usual, pretending nothing had changed. Yet inside, Something had. The fear that used to hum beneath my ribs had quieted. Every piece of paper in my file folder, every bill now in my name, felt like a brick in a wall no one could see. I wasn't raising my voice anymore. I was raising my ground. Dinner that night smelled of rosemary and tension. I had roasted chicken the way Petra liked it. Crisp skin, lemon butter glaze, but even the aroma couldn't soften the air when Drusilla Rodart arrived. She never waited to be invited. She floated in, perfume thick and voice louder than any welcome. I saw the loveliest senior facility across town. She began between bites, bright, clean, full of folks your age. Serafina. They even have a piano for evening sing-alongs. My fork paused midair. Petra's cheeks flushed. Mother, please. Oh, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Drusilla went on, smiling at Colt. Your mother-in-law would be much more comfortable there. It's practically a resort. Colt kept eating. Silent. Eyes fixed on his plate. Petra looked from him to me, her voice small. Maybe we could at least visit. Mama, just to see what it's like. I set my fork down carefully, the sound of metal against porcelain sharper than I intended. This is my home, I said, steady, but low. I decide what happens to me here. The words hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. Drusilla's painted smile stiffened. Colt's jaw tightened. Even Lyric, halfway through her mashed potatoes, froze mid-bite. Well, Drusilla said at last, folding her napkin with exaggerated grace. I meant no offense. Of course. I was only thinking of your comfort. Then think again, I replied. Soft, but final. The rest of the meal passed in clinking cutlery and unspoken thoughts. When everyone retreated upstairs, I stayed behind, washing dishes one by one until the sink shone. My reflection in the window didn't look frightened anymore, just tired and done with pretending. Later, in my room, I opened the drawer where I kept old papers. The faint smell of ink and dust rose up as I found the mortgage folder. My maiden name, Serafina Lera, was scrawled across the original deed in blue pen, the loops steady and proud. I traced each letter with my fingertip, remembering the woman who had signed it younger, poorer, but never small, downstairs. Laughter echoed faintly. I closed the drawer and whispered to the quiet. Not yet. The smell of cinnamon filled the kitchen that afternoon. I was baking a small batch of apple bread, something to keep my hands busy, to keep my heart from pacing too loudly. Outside, the oaks shimmered under the low Savannah sun. When the doorbell rang, I wiped my hands on a towel and went to answer it. A man in a gray jacket stood there, holding a clipboard. Mrs. Morrow. He handed me a thick envelope. Delivery requires acknowledgement. I signed my name without a tremor. The paper felt heavier than it should, like it already knew what it carried. I placed it on the console table in the hallway and went back to the oven. The timer beeped just as Petra and Colt came home. Mail's on the table, I said, without looking up. Minutes later, Petra's voice cracked through the house. What is this? She stood frozen in the hallway, the opened envelope in her shaking hand. Eviction notice. 30 days. Colt snatched it from her, scanning the page. You can't be serious. Serafina, this is our home. No, I said, removing the bread from the pan. This is my home. You have 30 days to find one built on respect. Drusilla, who'd followed them in like a shadow, gasped. This is insanity. You'd throw your own daughter into the street. I'm giving her back her independence, I said softly. The same thing I once fought to give myself. The room erupted, Colt shouting, Petra crying. Drusilla's sharp words slicing through the air. Only one sound broke me. Lyric's sob. She ran into my arms, tears streaking her cheeks. Are we leaving? Nana. I held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. You'll always have a home with me. Sweetheart, always. Later that evening, the house fell into uneasy silence. The envelope still sat where it had landed. Its edges curled like something scorched. My phone buzzed. It was Keegan. You did everything by the book. Mrs. Morrow, don't answer their anger with yours. Just stay calm. You're protected now. I hung up and watched the last bit of light fade from the kitchen window. The smell of apples lingered, sweet and steady. As the first night of freedom quietly began, the next days moved like slow rain down a window, steady, silent, impossible to stop. 20 days left. The air inside the house had changed. Every sound carried an edge. Petra no longer played music while she cooked. Colt slammed doors instead of closing them, and even the refrigerator seemed to hum louder, as if keeping score of our tension. She spent hours on her laptop, scrolling through listings. Everything's too expensive, she muttered one night, eyes rimmed red. Colt barely looked up from his beer. We'll find something. We always do. But his tone wasn't hopeful. It was tired, bitter. Drusilla had already taken the story to church. I heard from a friend who still sang in the choir. That poor girl, thrown out by her own mother. No one mentioned how that poor girl had planned to ship her mother off like luggage. Gossip has its own gravity. It always falls on the quiet one. Lyric had started waking up crying, her small footsteps padding to my door in the dark. Nana, are we still family if we don't live together? She whispered once, her voice trembling. I pulled her into bed beside me, brushing her hair from her forehead. Family isn't a house. Sweetheart, it's what we choose to keep safe. She fell asleep against me. Her breath soft, her heart steady. Mine wasn't, on the 12th night. Petra came to the kitchen after everyone had gone to bed. The only light came from the stove clock, casting her face in pale green. She sat across from me, her hands twisting a napkin. We never meant to hurt you, she said finally. Things just got out of hand. I looked at her the same eyes that once begged me for new shoes, for another bedtime story, for love I never stopped giving. Then next time, I said quietly, mean to love me. Her lips trembled. She nodded. Barely. We sat there a long while. Two women separated by pride, guilt, and a table that had held generations of our meals. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Colt pacing, perhaps. But neither of us moved. The clock ticked between us, marking the slow unraveling of what once felt unbreakable. The morning they moved out. The sky hung low and gray over Savannah, the kind of sky that feels like it's holding its breath. The moving truck rumbled into the driveway at 9 sharp. Men in blue uniforms started carrying boxes through the front door, one after another, their boots echoing across the tile like punctuation marks at the end of a long sentence. Drusilla stood by the doorway, wrapped in her shawl like royalty surveying a battlefield. Careful with that box, it's fragile. She barked, though the men didn't work for her. Colt sulked on the porch steps, arms crossed, eyes avoiding mine. Petra drifted between rooms like a ghost, saying little, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. Lyric found me in the kitchen. Nana, do we really have to go? Her small hands clutched my apron, sticky from the syrup I'd poured over her pancakes that morning. A quiet act of love she might remember someday. You have to go with your parents. Sweetheart, I said softly, but this house will always know your laughter. She buried her face against me and cried. I held her until one of the movers called Petra's name from the hallway. By noon, the rooms had emptied. The framed photos were gone. The furniture left shallow marks on the floors, like ghosts of old routines. The silence that followed their departure was not cruel, it was vast, open, alive. A white van pulled up just as the truck drove away. The locksmith stepped out. A young man with quiet hands and kind eyes. "Mrs. Morrow," he asked. I nodded. He got to work. Metal clicked, latches turned, and new brass keys slid into place. When he finished, he handed them to me, 3 small, gleaming tokens of control. "All set," he said. "No one but you has access now." I held the keys in my palm. Their weight solid and real. "Thank you," I whispered. Outside, Drusilla's voice carried faintly through the open window. "She'll regret this one day." I watched the locksmith's van disappear down the street, then hung the keys on the hook by the door. My hand lingered there as I whispered to the quiet. "No, I'll remember it." The house smelled different, now paint and lemon oil instead of tension. I had hired 2 young painters from the neighborhood, and together we rolled a soft cream color over the tired walls. Each stroke felt like rewriting history, covering years of invisible bruises. Outside, the roses I'd replanted along the fence had started to bloom again, bright and stubborn against the early spring air. Every Saturday, Lyric came to visit. She always brought a little bag of sugar and a smile that filled the house like sunlight. We baked cinnamon bread together, our laughter echoing through rooms that had forgotten how to echo anything but silence. When the timer rang, she'd announce, "It smells like Nana's house again," and I'd feel something warm open inside me, something I thought had closed for good. Petra called for the first time 3 weeks after the move. Her voice was softer, uncertain. "Mom," she said, "I've started counseling. I'm trying to unlearn some things. The way I spoke to you, the way I let other people talk about you." There was no defense in her tone this time. No attempt to justify, just humility, quiet and raw. "I'm glad," I said. "Healing's a hard language to relearn." She hesitated before asking, "Could we meet? Maybe for tea?" We met 2 days later. On the porch, I brewed chamomile and set out my good cups. Petra looked older, thinner, but her eyes held something honest I hadn't seen in years. We spoke gently about Lyric, her new job, the small steps she was taking to be her own person. I listened, not as a mother aching for apology, but as a woman guarding her peace. When she stood to leave, she touched my arm. "Thank you for not giving up on me." As dusk settled, I sat alone on the porch, the Spanish moss shifting in the warm savanna breeze. The house was quiet, but not empty. My gaze fell on the keys hanging by the door, 3 brass pieces of proof, glinting beneath a small wooden tag I'd carved myself. It read, "Home." I smiled, whispering into the stillness, "Respect is the rent everyone pays to stay in my life."